Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about gender and delinquency. To really do this right, we would have to do a very thorough examination of differences between males and females from a biopsychosocial perspective. We'd be looking at brain anatomy, the body, hormone levels, different ways we might think, emotions, structure of the brain, and then, of course, the social context, meaning how are we socialized? How are our personalities structured by agents of socialization and the cultural and environment in which we live in? So I've added a couple supplemental videos on this topic just to introduce you guys to some stuff. Because again, I would be here for decades. But like again, when I started my PhD, for example, the very first thing I studied was, are their psychological differences between sexes. And I opened up Pandora's box of learning. I wound up so deep in anatomy, I had to go all the way back into the ocean when we first split into male and female sex cells, and then looking at how that increases viability of the species. And then now you have to move forward in evolution millions of years, and here we are. Psychologists are very quick to point out that despite some biological differences, the effect on that on behavior is very minimal. And you have to look at species wide, like human males, females, intersex are very similar compared to other species where there's much larger differences. Yes, there's a little bit of brain structure differences. Yes, there's a little more testosterone in one and more estrogen in another. Yes, you can argue that maybe women have more emotional intelligence and boys are better at visual spatial skills. But again, how much of that's nature nurture? Do we socialize girls to be better at English and boys to be better at like hitting baseballs? You know? And so again, that's what I mean. To really do this right, we'd have to go deep, deep into gender socialization, gender role socialization, the formation of gender identity. So I've added some supplemental lectures because just to go deep into those subjects, I'm fascinated by it. Hopefully, you guys are also interested in it. But this one, we want to really look at just gender and delinquency. So I'm going to keep it pretty close to the book here and try not to go too off track because before you know it, we'll be here 3 hours later still talking about gender. But the book opens up with highlighting the gender ratio in offending. And it basically asks the question, why is it that boys are far more likely to be perpetrators of what society would label as delinquent behavior, but especially when it comes to things like violence and things along those lines? Boys far outweigh girls when it comes to the frequency of engaging in acts that can be labeled as delinquent or criminal. So today's feminist criminologists agree on gender-based differences in adolescent experiences, developmental rates, and the scope of motivation of male and female patterns of offending. So yes, there are, because we socialize men and women differently, that creates divergent experiences. You can look at the body and how it develops, and there are some subtle differences. Like girls hit puberty before boys, and that is totally associated, like early puberty for girls is associated with higher rates of delinquency, things along those lines. But again, we're really going to be looking at the social context and, studying what out here is really accounting for these differences. Is it just biology? Is it just that males have more testosterone and are more aggressive, or is it part of a social molding process that's also associated with socioeconomic status and things along those lines? Okay, so there's general agreement that female adolescents enjoy greater social support and are more controlled than males. So one general argument is that look at the social context and look at the ways males and females are treated. Do males engage in more delinquent behavior because they're out there running around without as much people watching over them, and girls are more watched over? Okay, that's a good question to ask. Furthermore, a review of available data shows that females are less disposed to crime than males and have fewer opportunities for certain crimes. So, again, what is it in the social context that's exposing males more to opportunities to engage in criminality, but less for females? And then again, why is it that females are less disposed to crime than males? And again, that's very complex. You have to look at biological differences, psychological differences in the way we think, emotional levels, wants, needs, desires, and then you have to look at the social context and ask what out here is structuring people's behavior. Okay? Researchers commonly accept that high self esteem has the effect of discouraging favorable risk taking situations among female adolescents while encouraging risk taking situations in males. Are males more likely to engage in risk taking behavior? As we've discussed, teenagers in general are more likely to engage in risk taking behavior because the prefrontal cortex that's responsible for your executive functions has not grown, yet your body is driving you through hormones and neurotransmitters to go and engage in things, go out in the social context, take chances, go and meet people. However, is the way that we socialize males and females different? Why are males engaging in more risk-taking behavior? Is that biological in nature, or is that we as a society structure boys? So one argument is we start to segregate into male and female groups around like what, age 5, 6. When we segregate into these groups, these segregated groups, we highlight specific female features for the female groups, learning about female culture, and males highlight, male attributes that relate to male culture. When we teach males to be males, what are we teaching them? Are they becoming more aggressive? Do we teach them to fight, And when girls get together, do we teach them to like play and work in groups and learn to communicate? Are there differences in the types of play between boys and girls? So again, your book opens up like toy choices and just children's behavior and things. And again, I could spend all day talking about it, but let's just agree that there are some differences in the socialization process, okay? And then the feminist model of delinquency looks at a patriarchal world and says, hey, as this world structures by males, how is that associated with female delinquents? And then this opens up a whole door that we can't get too much into today, but it asks the questions of, as a system itself, like as a justice system, should we maybe treat males differently than females because they have divergent experiences? Is there different types of rehab and things along those lines that we need to get into? And then finally, this opening section just introduces this idea that there's an intersectional approach and that we have to look at someone's age, gender, race, social class, culture, to really get account for all of these different variables in the social context that may create divergent experiences. And so it's a little bit broad. So when we're trying to figure out why are people committing crimes, why are males more likely to commit crimes than females, how is culture, race, gender, social class associated with it? Meaning, is being poverty or being black or being male, or are these factors or growing up in a culture of poverty, are these factors associated with people committing crimes? And they are. But again, it's really deep because we have to explain how are they associated with it. So for this lecture, we're going to talk about gender. We'll get deeper into race and social class and things as we go. This chapter does finish out with a couple of highlights on those subjects, which we will touch upon to finish out. So first, some general questions that we were having to ask. Why are females less likely than males to be involved in most crimes? And then why are males more crime prone than females? And what explains gender differences in rates of offending? Okay, so this is what I keep referring to. These are big, big sociological questions, but to answer these, we need so much information. We have to look at male and female anatomy and biology and the brain structure, emotions, cognitions, motivations, and then we have to look at the social context and all of these factors in the social context that are associated with people committing crimes. And again, you have to ask, is committing crimes an individual level trait, or is that a societal level trait? And what you're going to find that it's mix and match. Poverty, societal level things are associated with higher rates of drug abuse, substance abuse, whatever it might be. However, just because you're poor, does that justify you committing crimes? That's the individual take. So the social context of delinquency, gender roles in delinquency. Children are socialized into pre-existing gender arrangements and construct understandings of themselves and how they relate to others in terms of those frameworks. This is what I'm getting at with the whole gender socialization process. By socializing people differentially, is this resulting in differential rates of people committing crimes or delinquent acts? And so that's what I'm saying. There's too much information to go into this lecture. Check out my supplemental lecture that really delves into gender, gender role socialization, gender identity development, how we place different expectations upon males and females, how the social context and the social environment might be experienced differentially by them. Please take a deep dive into that. But let's get a little more specific. This chapter is really focusing on much more on females and accounting for this than it is males. It's looking at the difference between males and females, but it's really highlighting characteristics that are very female specific. So the female delinquent, average 13 to 17 years old, has a history of sexual and physical abuse and emotional problems, tends to come from a rough background, gets exposed to the criminal justice system early, has a history of dependent relations with older men, history of mental problems, and again, list goes on. So again, researchers have identified basic demographic, meaning these, frequencies in the social context, like age, race, socioeconomic status, whatever, and offense patterns, as well as background characteristics. So we're looking again at family dysfunction, trauma, abuse, health issues, substance abuse, risky sexual behavior, academic problems, exposure to delinquent peers in that type of culture. Okay? The profile of an at-risk adolescent female that emerges identifies common characteristics including stories of victimization, unstable family life, school failure, repeated status offenses, and mental health and substance abuse problems. So, right here, if you said, how can we help these people? Right there is the answer. That's the problem. They're experiencing sexual and physical violence. They have the unstable family life. They don't have that support. They're struggling in school and maybe going to a low income school where they're not investing in the kids as much. They're continuously getting into the system. They're struggling with, development and health, maybe even physical, mental health problems. And then again, the substance abuse problems too. These are just a whole list of risk factors. Your book has this whole chart looking at differences between males and females. Again, do we have subtle differences in biopsychosocial traits? Again, there is a little bit of body and brain differences, but how much does that affect our behavior overall? Why, girls tend to engage in less delinquent acts than boys. Girls tend to experience more negative life events than adolescents, but yet they don't commit as many crimes, but then it's a high risk for those that do commit crimes to get into it. Girls experience more trauma, such as abuse and rape, than boys. Um, Studies suggest that sexual abuse is pervasive amongst girls who engage in antisocial behavior. Girls experience different stressors than boys. Um, Boys have higher rates of ADHD and other like social problems like autism and things too. I cannot take the time to go deep diving into that, but again, we'd have to go into genetics, and then it's harder to make a girl or harder to make a boy than it is to make a girl, and therefore boys, because it requires more genetic coding, tend to have more problems, and that's a whole other deep dive, but stuff to look into. Girls tend to have mental health problems related to life stressors, experience of victimization, experience anxiety, depression, PTSD, a lot higher rates for girls than boys. Again, girls hitting early puberty is associated with underdeveloped cognitive and emotional systems for various reasons. What happens when a girl hits puberty early? What does people start treating them differently? Do they have to grow up too quick? A whole bunch of research there if you're interested in that. Um, yeah, so again, bunch of things, but again, what really is causing these differences? Is it these biological and psychological differences, or is it the varying experiences in the social context? But let's get into some of the causes, okay? The most significantly and potentially useful criminological research in recent years has been the recognition that girls' and women's pathways to their offendings differ from those of boys and men. Hence the feminist model. And that, look, if boys and girls' paths toward offending come from different directions, do we need different models to account for it and different models to treat and prevent it? It's a good question. The first step along females' pathway tends to be that victimization stage, which differs from the boys. Again, they're getting into it. So girls experience these life traumas, struggling with the family, exposure to negative cultures and all of that too, like the boys. But again, maybe their decisions, maybe their reasons are different. The ages at which interviewed adolescent girls reportedly were more likely to be beaten, raped, stabbed, and shot was 13 and 14. So again, these early encounters have major effects. Large proportion of girls who entered the juvenile justice system were as runaways, trying to escape abuse at home, hence that family life, right? Second step along females' pathway into the juvenile justice system is substance abuse. And then substance abuse is associated with them experiencing sexual victimization, for example. Okay? A third step along the female's pathway in the juvenile justice system is girls acting out at home or in school through sexual activity or by engaging in law violating acts and gang involvement. The emotional problems troubled girls usually have tends to influence their negative behaviors. As a result, they do poorly in school and are sometimes suspended and expelled, or they drop out. See, again, then they start getting disconnected from people, from groups, from the school system, from opportunities, and so it begins. Biopsycho explanations of female delinquency. Five vulnerability factors have been considered. One, stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety, again, is a psychosocial, biopsychosocial process. Experiencing life events can cause stress, or the way you're thinking can cause stress, which can then affect the body. ADHD and conduct disorder, intellectual deficits, early pubertal maturation, and mental health issues. Most of these factors apply also to boys' delinquency, but girls appear to have greater vulnerability to them. Four key factors contributing to female delinquency: dramatic biological onset of puberty, complex identification process because of a girl's competitiveness with her mother, the changing cultural position of females and the resultant uncertainty of loneliness, and the hostile picture that the world presents to some young females. Social explanations of female delinquency. The book just opens up theoretical explanations. Again, general strain theory, and this can also relate to stress. One, it's like poverty, not getting your needs, not having a good home life, experiencing sexual victimization. Blocked opportunity theory, the idea that they don't have access to what they need. Social learning theory, they're observing it in the social context. Control theory, girls experience more social control than boys, which accounts for them experiencing less rates of delinquency. Differential association theory, girls' access to certain crimes are different than boys. Labeling theory, once they get labeled, do they buy into it? Interactionist theory is we're the ones who create this social context, gender roles, gender socialization that's associated with it. And then again, looking at deterrence, rational choice, and routine activities theories. How much of girls committing delinquent crimes is their choice, and what can we do to prevent that? Feminist theories of delinquency. Girls' victimization and the relationship between the experiences and girls' crimes have been systematically ignored. Again, when we look at why girls are causing problems and how we create the juvenile justice system, is there a disparity that since boys and girls are coming at it from different directions and maybe their behaviors are slightly different, should we be treating things in a different way? All right, so that's just a general question that should be asked. But again, how do girls end up there? First, girls are frequently the victims of violence and abuse. Estimates that 3/4 of sexual abuse victims are girls, but unlikely those of boys. Girls' victimization and their response to that victimization are shaped by their status as young women. Second, their victimizers, usually males, have the ability to invoke official agency of social control to keep daughters at home and vulnerable. Third, as girls run away from abusive homes characterized by sexual abuse and parental neglect, they're forced into the life of an escaped convict, unable to enroll in a school or take a job to support themselves because they fear detection. Female runaways are forced to engage in panhandling, petty theft, and sometimes prostitution to survive. Fourth, it is no accident that girls who are on the run from abusive homes are on the streets because of impoverished homes become involved in criminal activities that exploit their sexuality. Because U.S. society has defined physically perfect young women as desirable, girls on the streets who have little else of value to trade are encouraged to utilize this resource. And then the four propositions: girls are victims of abuse. Victimizers often tend to be males. Girls tend to run away to get away from abuse, and once they're exposed to the streets. Okay, gender bias in the processing of female delinquents. Your book opens up the 7 corollaries of gender bias in the processing of female delinquents. Again, this is just looking at disparities between males and females and disparities in the way we treat each other. We're also going to look at a little bit of race and things along those lines. But society's disapproval of sexual activity results in discriminatory treatment of female juveniles. Juvenile law has long overly penalized females. Juvenile females are punitively processed through the juvenile justice system. The oppressive treatment of adolescent females is hidden within the justice system. Female status offenders are frequently found in contempt of court for violating a valid court order and then are placed in secure juvenile detention facilities. Early studies found that police officers, intake personnel, and judges support a sexual double standard. The typical girl entering the juvenile justice system is a nonviolent offender who is very often low risk but high need individual. Here we can introduce again the ideas of class that we've been talking about through the whole all these lectures. So I'm not going to go too deep into it because we've been discussing it highly. But again, there is this association between delinquent behavior and socioeconomic status. Powerful and serious problems of childhood and adolescence related to poverty set the stage for a young person's entry into homelessness, unemployment, drug use, survival, sex, and prostitution, and ultimately even more serious delinquent and criminal acts. Lower class adolescent females tend to confront higher risk levels than middle and upper class adolescent females. They're more likely to have unsatisfactory experiences at school, lack educational goals beyond high school, experience higher rates of physical and sexual abuse. To deal with pregnancy and motherhood, they tend to be involved in drug and alcohol dependency, confront the risks of HIV and AIDS, and lack support networks at home. Although not all juvenile adolescent females end up in the juvenile justice system, the likelihood of placement is greater for lower class girls. So again, we need to be asking these questions. Why boys more than girls for crimes? What leads girls into crimes and what leads boys into crimes? Are they the same or are they different? What sociological factors are associated with committing crimes like race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender? Okay? And then we need to also be looking at individual reasons, like what's going on with someone's head. What are they thinking when they're going out and committing these crimes? And then what's going on with their body that is motivating them to engage in crimes. Racial discrimination. African American girls, for example, received harsher dispositions than white girls, but contrary to what might be expected, Hispanic girls' dispositions were no harsher than those of white girls. As their offending severity, though, and prior records increase, the juvenile justice system tends to flip this, and white girls receive harsher treatment than African American girls. Because racism and poverty often go hand in hand, these girls are forced by their minority status and poverty to deal early and regularly with problems of abuse, drugs, and violence. Minority girls, minority meaning those with less power over their lives, their strategies for coping with the problems of abuse, drugs, violence, and gang membership, as research notes, tends to place them outside of the conventional expectations of white girls, and it also increases the likelihood that they will come to the attention of the juvenile justice system. So again, looking at things like police targeting and who is actually being picked up, compared to who's actually committing the crimes. So again, we need to be thinking about all these factors because you're going to look at it like, black males are more likely than white males within race to commit crimes, even though more whites in general commit crimes. Why are black males more at risk for committing crimes? And then again, you can't just say that it's just, psychological factors. So much of that is racism, class subjugation, and all these other factors that have to be considered. So again, when we're looking at delinquency across the life course, gender and delinquency or whatever it might be, we have to take this biopsychosocial approach. Because again, how much of your biology is driving you to make these decisions? And then once you're making decisions, why are you making these decisions? And then what are you experiencing in the social context that's, exposing you to situations where you are making these decisions? And then what other variables count for differential experiences? And again, it is just absolutely complex and can go on for days. So the whole point of this lecture, though, is just to really get you thinking about why is it that males commit more crimes? And again, just to account for that simple answer, we have to think about 10,000 different things, that biopsychosocial approach that I keep pushing. So hopefully that's starting to get in your head a little bit. And otherwise, wish you all the best and thank you so much.